Welcome to the Explainer. So today we're doing something, well, a little different. Instead of focusing on just one big story, we're going to look at all of them. We're going to take a snapshot of a single ordinary day, July 29th, 2025, and see what it can really tell us about the world we're all living in.
Okay, let's just start with the crazy flood of information that hits us every single day. So picture this. It's a Tuesday, and a gardener in Japan is just, weeding their flower bed. And what did they find? A live American-made hand grenade from World War II. I mean, talk about the past literally bubbling up into the present. All right, so on that exact same day, you've got the scene in a Tokyo office. A male employee at a big company, Nomura Securities, gets hooked up to a machine that simulates period pain. Yeah, it's all part of this initiative to build empathy in the workplace. And his reaction? It says it all. He's just like, "It's impossible. I'm sorry. I had no idea other people felt this kind of pain." I mean, what a way to try and understand someone else's world, right? And while all that's happening, we are pushing the absolute limits of exploration. A Japanese deep-sea drone, it's called the Urashima 8000, it just smashes a national record. It dives deeper into the ocean than any Japanese autonomous vehicle has ever gone before. So get this, on the same day, we're literally digging up the past in a garden and diving into the deepest, most unknown parts of our own planet. And at the very same time, we're being forced to look at some of the most serious global conflicts imaginable. A really prominent Israeli human rights group, B'Tselem, for the first time ever, labels their own country's actions in Gaza as genocide. I mean, that's a word with immense weight, and it just sent absolute shockwaves across the globe. Okay, so let's really dive into this contrast, because this is the core tension of our modern lives, isn't it? This constant whiplash we feel, bouncing between these huge, planetary-scale issues and the tiny personal stuff that makes up our day. So on one hand, you've got news that is just massive in scale. This number, 4. What does it even mean? Well, according to a big study in the journal Science Advances, and they used over 20 years of satellite data for this, it's the number of gigantic mega-drought regions that are forming across the entire northern hemisphere. We're not just talking about a dry summer here. This is a critical, long-term threat to our global water and food supplies. And then you have the complete other end of this spectrum. On that exact same day, you've got a writer for a Japanese lifestyle site who decides to count all the wooden knots on a single wall in his apartment. His entire world in that moment isn't the global water crisis. It's the weird, kind of cool patterns in the cheap wood used to build his home. And he counted over 30 of them, by the way. So while that guy's counting knots, the world's major powers are wrestling with this crisis in real time. In the US, you have President Trump, who publicly disagrees with the Israeli prime minister. He just states it flat out. Children are starving, and says the US is going to step in. At the same time, over in the UK, Prime Minister Starmer lays down an ultimatum. Agree to a ceasefire or Britain will officially recognize a Palestinian state. You can just feel the intense public diplomatic pressure coming from every direction on this one single day. And while all that high-stakes global drama is unfolding, the famous Japanese comedian Kato Cha and his wife, they're in the news for something completely different. It's a story about their own personal future. They decided to sell their huge mansion and move into a smaller apartment, just downsizing to get ready for old age. And you know what? It's a story that's just as profound, just as important as any of the others. It's just on a totally different scale. You know, when you put all this together, it paints this really fascinating picture of how we relate to time itself. It really feels like we're living in every era all at once, The future is constantly bumping up against the past. I mean, what's so incredible is that all of this is happening at the exact same time. So on the future side of the ledger, you've got Japan switching on its very first homegrown quantum computer. And get this, physicists finally settle a nearly 100-year-old debate between Einstein and Bohr about how reality itself works. But on that same day, the past just pushes its way into the present. There's that World War II grenade. There's a 77-year-old rock star who finally gets to live out his 40-year-old dream of becoming a manga artist. And then, in this perfect blend of both, you have AI, the ultimate future tech, helping researchers discover hundreds of ancient Nazca lines in Peru. It's just wild.
And hey, even our entertainment reflects this crazy time mashup. Nintendo announces that Mario Paint, a total classic from 1992, is now available on the Switch. So you've got the latest gaming tech being used to perfectly resurrect this piece of digital culture from more than 30 years ago. It really makes you think the past isn't even past anymore. It's just downloadable content.
So, in the middle of all this noise, this absolute collision of past, present, future, personal, and planetary, how do we even begin to make sense of any of it? Well, we try. We create systems. We're always searching for some kind of order in the chaos.
Here's one small example. There's this learning method from a popular Japanese book on how to study by yourself, and it's basically a simple system to bring some order to your own brain. First, you draw a map of everything you think you know about a topic. Then, after you study, you draw a new map of what you actually learned, and then you compare them. It's a really structured way to see your own blind spots and build some real solid knowledge. But what happens when the really big systems, like our political systems, are the actual source of the chaos? Well, on the same day, Japan's prime minister is basically under siege. You've got former party leaders meeting and deciding he should resign. You have a rival lawmaker just calling him a hideous, strange creature on social media. And his own party leadership, they're scrambling to figure out who to blame for a big election loss. The whole system is just fraying at the edges, and it seems like everyone is fighting to control the story.
And sometimes our systems fail with the most tragic consequences. This quote, it's from an official report written by an emergency dispatcher. A family called 119, that's like 911 in Japan, because their 50-year-old relative couldn't move. But the dispatcher was, in their own words, trapped by the preconception that it wasn't an emergency, so they dismissed the call. Hours later, after a second, frantic call, the man was dead. A total, fatal breakdown in the one system that's supposed to save us.
So what are we left with? We're left with this dizzying, just kaleidoscope of a single day. You've got progress right next to conflict, empathy next to violence, comedy and tragedy, quantum physics, and sweaty armpits. It's everything all at once. So how do we cope with all that? Well, most of us, we try to find a signal in all that noise. We turn our attention away from the huge, overwhelming problems to the small, manageable ones, right? We don't try to solve the mega drought ourselves, but we absolutely will read an article on how to talk to our boss, or look up tips on how to pack boxes for a move, or even search for solutions for sweaty armpits. We focus on the things we feel like we can actually control. And that brings us to the final big thought here. When you look at this single, chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying day, the real question isn't just what happened. The real question is, out of all that noise, what was the signal? Which one of these stories is the one that will actually define our future? What event from July 29th, 2025 will historians look back on and say, that was the one that mattered? And maybe more importantly, which one should we be paying attention to right now?